Okay, I'm going to presume that we are live now, streaming on Facebook, and I want to say welcome everyone to this special edition of a webinar for the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. I'll be the host of this webinar. My name is Jeff Ishee. I'm a farm broadcaster. I've been doing this for 25 years, working in farm communications, both radio and television, and this podcasting thing is all new to me and webinars, but I think we've all been introduced to Zoom and webinars a lot over the last couple of years due to the COVID crisis. Thankfully, we are getting out of that. But if you're watching live on Facebook, thank you for your participation. And we have a panel here, a very diverse group of Virginia farmers, market gardeners, horticulturalists, and we're going to talk briefly about soil health over the next hour, but it's all made possible by the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and I have to acknowledge their participation and their support. We get a lot of support for this effort from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the NRCS, also Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, as well as Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, the Agua Fund, and the National Turkey and Wildlife Foundation. So thanks so much to all of those groups and organizations for your support of Virginia agriculture and forestry, and in particular, the enhancement of our soil quality in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our panel tonight and let them tell you, our viewers, a little bit about their farm, and then we're going to get into a little bit more in depth on the technicalities of what they're doing to improve soil health on their own farming operation or in their own arena, so to speak. So we'll start with Robert Waring of Brandon Farms. Robert, tell us about your operation, where you're located, and what you produce.
We're row crop farmers, my dad and I, and we're in Tappahannock, Virginia. So we're 45 minutes east of Richmond. We are corn and soybeans, and we used to grow wheat 10 years ago, and we stopped to focus on cover crops. And so we've been cover cropping between corn and soybeans for almost 10 years. I guess we incorporate diverse species on the farm, and I have two jobs, so I also farm with Dad, and you mentioned the Department of Conservation and Recreation, so I'm actually a nutrient management specialist for DCR. I have been with DCR for 17 years, and I'm working in nutrient management, cover crops, for DCR. I am on the Southern Cover Crops Executive Council. I'm also on a farmer think tank for the University of Florida. And I've gotten to know a lot of what other farmers are doing from those, from being on that farmer think tank. It's a great place.
That's the whole purpose of this webinar, is to learn what other farmers are doing. And that's an important thing. I have to ask, though, I've heard some reports of an excellent corn crop east of Richmond. Are those rumors true?
We did all right. The lines at Purdue will tell you. Yeah, we did fine. It was an average to above average crop. Same with soybeans. So we did very, very well.
All right. Of course, we'll get the numbers at the end of the year, but I've been hearing some rumors of some phenomenal numbers with corn yields east of Richmond, there along the James River and so forth. So
last good year was 2018. So we're due for another one. So yes, we're doing well. Thank you.
Welcome to the panel. Kayleigh, Mize, tell us about yourself.
Well, hello, I'm Kayleigh Mize. I am the Agriculture Extension Agent for Spotsylvania County, but I do service other counties. So Caroline, Stafford, the city of Fredericksburg, and King George. So I'm basically I am the livestock extension agent. So I'm more geared towards livestock and helping producers, learn more about their livestock. So cattle, sheep, whatever have you, ruminants, horses, all that good stuff. But I was previously a 4-H agent. So I shifted into being an ag agent. And I think this is what I was born to do. I love helping farmers I love learning about soil. I love helping the environment, not only on a soil level, but just, providing uh, producers, just homesteaders, people who want to produce their own food, teaching them the ways to do it, best practices, if you will. So that's basically me. I don't really have a lot else to say, but I'm very much for the soil, just because, well, not just because, but basically everything that animals eat is in the ground. So what's in the ground, growing from the ground, is the soil. That's, the makeup. So I want the soil to be good.
I'll ask the same question that I asked to Robert. What are the farmers telling you about the harvest this fall? Are we seeing a good harvest in your region?
So as far as crops, I'm not 100% sure. I don't get a lot of those numbers, if you will. Those are more so Caroline, King George, and we're looking for a ag agent down there who would be more crop focused. So I honestly don't have an answer for you. Yeah, I don't know, to be completely honest.
All right. Thank you very
Sorry.
much. Leo Tammi will be next. Leo, tell me about your farming operation.
Thank you, Jeff. I wasn't born in Virginia, but I got here as soon as I could. My wife and I moved here just about 40 years ago. And our intention was to create an innovative livestock operation. I grew up on the fall line, and that's where I started to farm. I basically was homesteading when I got out of the Army, and it got a little bit out of hand. But the greatest tutor for me were the infertile and unforgiving soils that I began farming, and I learned a lot. So when we moved to Virginia, I was so pleased to see that we were able to set ourselves on a farm that, even though it was steep and rocky and was severely eroded, much of it, and a lot of it was just covered in cedars, we were able eventually to create a good livestock forage operation. Actually, ironically, the terrible soils that I learned from were also covered in, were also severely eroded and overgrazed and covered in brambles and brush. And that essentially describes a farm that we moved to. So I knew what to do in a way. But anyway, I think we've eventually created a innovative forage livestock operation that I can describe.
Well, you're very modest. I know for a fact that you are a former Virginia Shepherd of the Year. You are well known in the sheep and lamb community for producing excellent livestock, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Heather Corner, tell me about your operation.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm pleased to be here. My husband and I own a small market vegetable farm in Central Virginia. We sell almost exclusively at farmers markets in the Charlottesville and Lexington area, and we raise over 50 varieties of vegetables on a little over an acre. We also grow plant starts, garden starts in little 2-inch pots in the spring. We sell a lot of those in the spring to gardeners. So we moved on to the farm in 2013. We're finishing up our 8th season here. It had been a market vegetable farm for 10 years before that. And when we moved on to the farm, there was the rototiller had been used a lot, and there was a pretty thick pan just below the surface of the soil that the roots weren't able to penetrate. So we've been working on increasing infiltration and rebuilding the soil since then. We do use tractor tillage, but we use a chisel plow and then discs for making raised beds. And then over the years, we've gotten better at incorporating cover crops both in the summertime and also in the wintertime, so that most of the farm gets, it's very challenging on a small acreage to find room for your cover crops. But we figure out, I think we're up to about 75% coverage on our cover crops every year, and it rotates. We're also starting to experiment with some with skipping tillage and using some no-till, inserting some no-till practices in certain beds in a 2 to 3 year rotation, so that we can reduce the amount that we're disturbing the soil. So we're slowly trying to incorporate better soil practices into our sort of raised bed plastic mulch system.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this panel. And I've got so many questions for all of you already. Tom Benevento, I believe you have 3 guests from your operation joining us. So tell us about your farm and your the other guests that are joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, we really feel honored to be a part of this, and are excited to learn so much from all of you. I'll have my one of our other co-workers, Caroline, will give us just the overview, and then others here in this room will share a little bit. Caroline, can you share?
Absolutely. Hello, yeah, I'm Caroline. Thank you for having us. Hello there. I work with 3 of them there, and then 1 other staff member, Abraham, who's not with us tonight. But we work on the Jubilee Climate Farm in Harrisonburg, Virginia. It's about a 6-acre farm where it's based on 2 major principles. One is we have this community garden space for recent refugees and immigrants to the area to come build community and kind of just share agricultural experiences and knowledge. And like, there's such a value in this like shared learning there that we've recognized and are like really trying to cultivate. I should mention we just got started in March of this year, so everything is very new for us. So it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of still just like basic infrastructure building and getting things running. But the second pillar we're based on is trying to figure out how we can best sequester carbon from the atmosphere through like in this temperate climate region. So we are not a production-based farm. So it's like basically entirely experimental. So we have flexibility to fail, which is something that's really exciting to us, because it's also like we can try things out, and if it doesn't work, we can do it again. And it's like really exciting potential that we can invite other farmers that would love to try something out, but maybe don't have the land to experiment on just because of production reasons, to come and try something out with us and see where that goes. So currently, like the major project we've been focused on this year is figuring out what cover crop mixtures might work the best. And we're working in conjunction with James Madison University in Harrisonburg, some professors there and some students to actually do cover crop testing. So both testing like what mixes are actually sequestering the most carbon, but also like, are they actually creating the most viable yield? Because these 2 things go hand in hand. There has been lots of trial and error this first go at it. So we're really excited with this first season's lessons to go into next spring and continue to improve upon that. And then I will hand it over actually to Tom to kind of talk about some of our future projects, like our silvopasture system we're working on setting up, and Irma and Maricruz there will fill in a little bit about more of our justice side of the project.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies if it will take us just a little longer, because there's more of us here who will share, but I'll be as brief as I can. Yeah, things that we're working on, we have bioreactor systems that are a special kind of compost that was developed in New Mexico and California. That's a high fungal compost system we'll be applying to our fields, because they're supposedly noted for increased fertility and carbon sequestration. We're also going to be designing what's called an intensive silvopasture, which would incorporate hedgerows on the contour with fruit and nut trees. Primarily, we're looking at persimmons and Asian pears and some forage crops. And then in between the pasture, we're going to be experimenting with intense nitrogen fixing species of trees with pasture, which is known. It's been practiced in Colombia and some other places in South America, not so much in the temperate area, incorporating species like the poplar, mimosa, willows, mulberries that will be grazed down by sheep and then moved on quickly to the next paddock to really increase carbon sequestration and soil health and fertility rapidly. So we're excited about experimenting with that, along with some other things. But I'll let you hear from Maricruz and Irma briefly as well, and I'll translate along the way. So apologies if it takes a little bit more time.
That's okay.
Okay, thanks so much. Si quiere hablar un poquito, Irma.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Irma. Yo quiero compartirles que vengo de familia campesina. Mi abuelo fue campesino.
My name is Irma, and I just want to share with you that I come from a peasant farm family, indigenous farm. My grandparents were farmers in Mexico, in Oaxaca.
Es importante para mí aquí en este país que las nuevas generaciones aprendamos de nuestros maestros, los antepasados.
And for me, it's really important that the youth in this country learn from our ancestors, and that learn the traditions and wisdom from way back.
Experimentando las prácticas de ellos, por ejemplo, de nutrir la tierra por medio del carbón.
Practices that were done many years ago by improving the soil with adding carbon or biochar.
Entonces recibimos beneficio para la tierra, para los animales, para nosotros mismos, para los seres humanos.
And we receive benefits in so many different ways, with the soils, with the plants themselves, with our own humanity in some ways.
Es importante volver a renovar la tierra para que se vuelva otra vez fértil. Me siento muy feliz de pertenecer a este grupo, de seguir experimentando, seguir sanando la tierra.
I feel really lucky to be working with this project and healing the earth and the soils. And as we heal the earth, it's something that's really important. Maricruz, ¿quiere decir algo?
Sí, mi nombre es Maricruz. Nosotros también trabajamos la tierra y plantamos.
So my name is Maricruz, and I also work, and we work with the soil and we plant things.
Me gusta trabajar en la tierra, me gusta el campo. Mis padres, pues solo mi mamá vive, mi papá ya no, pero me gusta siempre desde niña trabajar la tierra porque he aprendido mucho y me ha sanado la tierra.
And I just want to say that my mom is the only one still alive, and I grew up in a farming family, and for me, the work, it really helps not only heal the soil, but it heals myself.
Well, thank you very much. It is a true honor for me to be hosting this diverse panel of Virginia horticulturalist farmers. We've got new farmers, we've got traditional row crops, we've got livestock producers. Based on your introductions, I've got a question for each of you. Robert, I'll start with you first. Traditional row crop with corn and soybeans. We talk a lot about, in your specific community, about best management practices. What is the one single practice that you've seen to be the most beneficial for the soil on your farming operation?
Cover crop. And so no-till and cover crop. I mean, I'll have to say that they're together. We've been no-till for almost 40 years, I think. And we've been planting cover crops for the last 10 years. Diverse cover crops. I started probably 2 years ago. We started looking at 7-way mixes and 5-way mixes, trying to see what will survive. We're looking at black oats and triticale, a lot of turnips, kale, brassicas, clover, sunflowers, trying to see if sunflowers will make it. Looking at the microbial activity and trying to find out what will make it through the winter in this climate. The goal is heat management and water management for my next cash crops. We go through extensive droughts and a lot of heat, and the cooler you can keep the soil, the better it is for those coming crops. So.
I think you mentioned turnips. I've heard that word more and more often in Virginia agriculture amongst the row crop producers. What does a cover crop with turnips do for the soil?
Well, so this is my first year trying them. I'm just seeing if they'll make it through the year. But so I kind of want for a second go off on a tangent, and so the way I look at soil health, it's sort of like human health, and whether you look at it unfortunately or fortunately, I had a bad day in 2014. And for 20 years now, I've been very healthy. I eat very healthy. I always exercise. And because of that bad day, the ER doctor basically said that because the way I was living my life, the way I was eating, that pretty much saved my life. And I don't see that there's much difference between what we take in, our ability to eat healthy and ward off stress or ward off disease or what have you, how our body reacts to stress and then recovers to that stress is I think is based off of how we live our lifestyle health-wise. So soil health in my mind is no different. So if I've got a healthy soil that is feeding my cash crop nutritious, I guess you say nutritious food versus say throwing out pellets, and we do that. We do that. But the food that healthy soil is giving my cash crop gives it the ability to deal with stress, and that stress could be heat, drought, or disease, or what have you. And I found that healthy plant can tolerate those stressful situations that it ultimately will have. And in the end, will save yield, not necessarily increase, but will save yield, I think. So that's how I look at soil health.
And Heather Coiner of Little Hat Creek Farm in Central Virginia, the thing that you mentioned that got my attention was soil compaction. I think a lot of farmers, I don't know, it seems like west of Richmond, you get into heavier soils and more soil compaction. What are you doing specifically to address that issue?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the number one thing is to minimize the use of a rototiller, because that is known to create a really hard pan layer about 6 inches below the surface. It's still really useful for some things like really sensitive direct seeded crops, and we use it really sparingly. But we also use a chisel plow, which is about a 12-inch long rod that doesn't turn over the soil. It just cuts through the soil. So that helps break up the compaction we do have really heavy clay soils here. And we bought an implement that was way too big for our tractor. And so our tractor mechanic said, well, why don't you just take, most of them off? And so we have a three-pronged chisel plow now for our little tractor. And you can drive it in a pattern, so you break up the compaction. And then we use a set of discs to break up those chunks a little bit more too. And we only do that once or most twice a year. And it's usually before and after planting a cover crop. So that is one thing. And then the other thing is making sure that the soil always has roots in it, or is covered in some way. So it either has a cover crop, a cash crop, or some sort of mulch on top. Is it hay mulch? Is it plastic mulch? Is it a landscape fabric? It's got to have something on top to cover it, and that helps bring up the soil organisms like earthworms and things that help decrease the compaction as well.
And Kayleigh Mize, you are an agriculture and natural resources agent with Virginia Cooperative Extension. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of soil testing and what time of the year is best to do a soil test?
So thank you for that question. Before I get to that, I just want to go back to Robert's point of the turnips. And so we put those in the ground. Hopefully you agree with me, Robert, to allow this to decompose and to build up that soil organic matter. So we come back and plant, our plants are going to more so flourish. Obviously there might need some other implementation, the nitrogen or something of that nature, but that's mostly, we're holding the soil with the turnips or whatever our cover crop is. So I just want to specify that. I think everyone knows that, but I just want to say it. As far as soil testing, so you can go to any extension office. So it doesn't matter what county you're in, you can go in there, get some soil boxes. They're free, but you will have to pay for the shipping generally to send them to Virginia Tech to the soil testing lab. Usually you can do it anytime. A lot of times I've been getting a lot of people coming in for soil tests now. But you probably are more so once you put on your fertilizer or whatever have you before your growing season. So early spring early spring, late. It's dependent on a lot of different circumstances, but generally in the springtime before your plants are planted or they're flourishing and growing in that growing stage, pre-growth stage, if you will. But yeah, so I mean, you can go to this any extension office, get some soil boxes. They might give you a box to send them in. You might have to, do that on your own. Go to the post office, send that in, and you'll get soil tests back, or you'll get the results back, excuse me. And you can always talk with the extension agent that you went to, or whatever have you, and you can talk about why is my nitrogen so low? What can I do to help that? And generally on those soil test reports, they will give you, I guess, recommendations for ways to increase your nitrogen level, potassium, all that good stuff, phosphorus.
Very good. Very good. Want to remind all of our viewers that if you have a question for our panelists, go ahead and jot that down and get it to us, and we'll do our best to get an answer from one of our panelists. And I see that Kemper Marable is checking in. Eric Benfelt, Marshall Hall said he's been no-till for 40 years, loving every day. Question for Robert from Lynn Goodman: Hackerai turnips or regular purple tops?
First year trying them, and it's purple top. The only reason I'm trying them is to see if I've been using radish, and they will sometimes winter kill. And so I'm trying to see if the turnips will in fact make it through the winter more so. But purple top it's my first year trying them.
All right, very good. Leo, Tammi, let's come to you now. You have a primarily livestock operation. Tell us about the mix, the importance of animals on soil health. Tell us about that. And your microphone is still on mute. There we go. All right, there you
go. In the part of the Shenandoah Valley I live, the soils are basically steep and rocky. Not much of the farms in my immediate vicinity are tillable. Although we do. We depend primarily on perennials because we are primarily a forage operation, but we also make use of some summer annuals. I've got like 40 years of experience growing brassicas, rape turnips, and rape turnip crosses, and so on, and we depend on them for forage. Our sheep right now, our lactating ewes and fall-born lambs, are on turnips now because they pack a whale of a lot of nutrition for the lactating animals and the growing lambs. When I moved here 40 years ago, I remember one of the elderly ladies in the neighborhood said, the rocks weren't as big when I was a child. And I thought, well, that's just a little bit of that senile dementia coming out. But I came to realize she's right, that these soils are so subject to erosion, and we had so much erosion on this place. So we have naturally been focusing on what we can do to build soil. And as a matter of fact, I remember, some years ago, I read one of Andre Boisen's works called Grass Productivity, I think. This was a French researcher, and he researched grass production in the 40s and 50s. And he learned that a good forage operation is producing 1,600 pounds to a ton of earthworms per acre. And to me, at that time, that was an epiphany, which is really a dope slap moment, that I had been up until that time preaching the virtues of production efficiency, trying to squeeze out as many pounds of meat per acre that I could, and was proud of what we were doing. And then I realized that if I'm producing a ton of earthworms, I'm also building the soil, abating erosion, I'm cleaning the water, I'm providing biodiversity, habitat for wildlife, and probably most importantly, a view shed for my neighbors. So in other words, what I'm getting paid for is the least of what I'm doing. And I forget your question.
Well, it's just about the importance of having animals.
Oh,
And I mean, we could talk manure, I guess, all night long.
oh, absolutely.
But
Yeah,
manure is important.
yeah, well, we try to keep animals out on pasture just as we don't like them in the barn. But what manure we do handle, we compost, and we find that really valuable. Compost is tremendously valuable, and livestock complete the cycle of life. The forages, the grasses, what we're producing, we keep the ground covered all year long, and that photosynthesis, of course, is producing, the sugars, the fundamental of life on this planet, and we would not have these forages. We would not have this any of this production without livestock. Grasses and forages and all these plants co-evolved with the livestock in their habitat. You can't, you cannot have a healthy system without both.
Very well. Kayleigh, we have a question for you from Wilfred, who would like to know more about the importance of why is it important to do a soil test at the same time every year? And I presume that, for instance, if you do it in December, you should always do it in December. Is that important?
So in my experience, I don't know if it's that important every year. So number one, you don't necessarily have to do a soil test every year. So if you're doing, let's say you're making hay, right? So you're growing the grass, you're cutting it off, basically. You're not putting those same nutrients back into the ground. Then you want a soil sample. Possibly also for Robert with his crop production. I don't know if he soil tests every year, but you want to make sure that all, the soil has the nutrients it needs. You need to put fertilizer on it or whatever. So not necessarily do you have to do it at the same time every year. But generally so if you have cool season grasses, you want to do it before cool season grasses take off, if you will. So early spring. Warm season could be later. It kind of just depends for the most part, in my experience, that is. I don't know about Robert. I don't know what he does as far as soil testing.
So row crops, I'll pull every acre every year in the fall, and I'll get my baseline. I'll go back in the spring, and I'll do it again. And I'm trying this coming year to pull it later when the soybeans are up. I'm gonna pull them when the soybeans are up, and I'm gonna pull a sample of my cover crop, my rye, and I'm gonna send it to a lab and get the potash analysis of that rye, and I'm gonna factor that into my fertilizer. One of the questions I saw in there was on tillage radish, and I do use tillage radish for compaction. I know that we talked about compaction earlier. I use tillage radish, rye, a lot of those for compaction. But what I noticed was, I guess it was 3 years ago, I did my own research on the farm where I looked at rapeseed and radishes in strips. And I actually soil tested behind those radishes. And I found that 60 pounds of potash had been brought up from the soil and deposited on top of the soil for those soybeans. So I'm using the radishes more. They're little silos. They're like little nutrient silos. And so I'm using those radishes and the turnips for that reason. Not necessarily compaction so much, but it's a good benefit of it. So.
Right. And that's the benefit of, if you do have row crops or whatever, having a cover crop so that you can put those nutrients back to the soil for your next round of corn, soybeans, whatever have you.
The next I'll offer for anyone on the panel who would like to respond, and this is a one-word question, and it's not really a question, it's just one word. It comes from our viewer, Marshall Hall. Regeneration. That's a word that I'm hearing more often in Virginia agriculture. Would anybody like to jump on that and talk about regeneration, what it is and how it benefits soil health.
I'd love to share just a little bit as that word relates. Just sharing a little of my background. I lived and worked in Guatemala and Dominican Republic for nearly 20 years, working in agriculture and learning, in many ways, regenerative agriculture from these communities, these village communities, particularly indigenous populations. One is the home garden, which is a multi-strata tree crop system that is sort of the model of a regenerative agricultural system that's over 13,000 years old in its practice. And it's mimicking basically what an ecosystem does, what a forest ecosystem, and the process is following succession and moving that along like nature would to build a permanent perennial system, right? And they're highly productive and super diverse. Some of the systems that I participated in and some that we're looking to begin to develop here in the temperate zone of Shenandoah Valley is, they had crops, they'll have like, 80 or 50 different plant varieties in a very small location within like a quarter of an acre. And it's building its own soil. It's creating, as Leo was mentioning, the habitat environment for wildlife, water retention, stopping soil erosion. So regenerative agriculture is following these practices that mimic nature, where there's no till, where we're always having roots in the soil, where we're incorporating animals integrated into the system, where we're building diversity and always keeping the soil covered. So, those are some of the elements that I see really critical, and something that's been done for so long. It's not really new.
Great. Well, we're getting a lot of activity from our viewers who have a lot of questions, evidently, and that's a good thing. Farmers learning from each other. Earlier in the conversation, Robert talked about conducting an experiment on his farm. Don't you think that farmers should always be experimenting with different things? Carolyn, I heard you describe an experiment that you were doing there with your operation at Jubilee Climate Farm. What are some experiments you have planned for 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom touched on one of our experiments we're working on. Our big project is undertaking our silvopasture system. I might pass it over to him to go into. We're talking about doing like 3 different paddocks and integrating sheep production into that. But Tom, do you want to talk a little about the 3 different sections we might experiment with there?
Sure. We're going to have, we're designing them right now. It's on a steep rocky slope that's highly eroded. And we'll run small swales with then perennial strips along those, and in between those will be the pastures. And so one paddock area will be just perennial grasses of different mixes. The second paddock area will be adding compost to it and stimulating the soil through that compaction and hoof interaction with the soil, with the animals. And the third one will be this intensive silvopasture system that will have within the actual grasses planted 1 meter apart, different varieties of nitrogen fixing trees that will grow, or not all nitrogen fixings, like we'll have poplar in there and willow and mulberry, but also locusts, honey locusts, and mimosa, which would be and really stimulating the soil. So then we're going to track and be testing soil probably 3 times each season or each year, once we incorporate it, or before we incorporate it, midway through and after harvesting. So we'll be tracking the dynamics of the soil microbial health as well as the carbon sequestration. We'll be adding the bioreactor material in there too, which is a heavy fungal decomposition material that is highly reactive for inoculation for microbial activity.
Very good information. And Heather Corner of Little Hat Creek Farm, any experiments for 2022?
Well, I mentioned one in the chat in response to a question by Kemper Maribel about if anyone has used sun hemp as a cover crop. We're going to be trying that for the first time this year in the summer rotation. Usually we just do a buckwheat in between our spring and fall crops, vegetable crops, but we're going to try sun hemp and sorghum Sudan grass this year. to get a little bit more biomass into the soil. They're both really fast growing and good for recycling nutrients back into the soil. So we're going to try that. And as I mentioned before, we're also going to set aside a few beds that we will be cover cropping, and then killing the cover crop for the next crop, not by cutting it down with a weed whacker, or maybe we'll get our hands on a roller crimper somewhere, a little one for our tractor, and then covering it with some landscape fabric, and planting directly into that with transplants. And so this is a method that we saw being used at the Fauquier Educational Farm in Fauquier, Virginia, and that they use it in combination with a raised bed plastic mulch system, and in a 2 to 3 year rotation. And we thought that this was a good way for us to experiment with no-till without completely throwing away what we're doing, and starting over.
Very good. I see we've got about 15 minutes remaining. Where time flies when we're talking about soil health and talking about agriculture and forestry here in Virginia amongst ourselves. My final question for each of you will be the same. I'd love for each of you to talk about something that inspires you when it comes to soil health. Is it a podcast that you listen to, and feel free to name it? Is it a book that you've read? Is an extension agent in your neighborhood, someone from the Soil and Water Conservation District who inspired you? Was it your grandparents? Robert, we'll start with you. What do you find that inspires you about soil health?
Well, so in my job, I get to talk with farmers, and I've had a lot of aha moments on my farm where you see something and it makes sense. And I've had being able to talk to farmers in the position that I'm in, not only as a farmer, but as a DCR nutrient management specialist. It is so fulfilling. I had one guy in here, and a quick story is that I tried last year some starter on soybeans, and I told him I was doing that for nutrient efficiency. And he said, well, I've done all that. I've used starter on soybeans, and I never saw a yield advantage from that. And I said, no, you're misunderstanding my point. What I'm trying to do is use less fertilizer with the same yield. That's where we're headed. And he kind of looked at me a second. He says, now I understand where you're headed. And so that type of moment, when they have their aha moment, when they're in your office and talking about agriculture, to me, that's extremely fulfilling, and it moves what we're trying to do with soil health forward. That would be my moment, I think.
Very well said. Kayleigh, what inspires you?
So I actually grew up farming. So my dad is a farmer. We actually produce sheep, just like Leo. He raises sheep, We had some cattle. I was in 4-H, did all that kind of stuff. So being with him and being, I guess, his protege, if you will, I learned a lot about soil health, why he doesn't like to cut the grass below like 3 inches. So, at his house, the grass never looks like it's cut, because he wants to keep that organic matter on there. He doesn't want to create erosion or runoff or anything of that nature. So, I mean, that his practices have kind of rubbed off on me. So even though I don't own a house yet, I don't have that. I do see myself possibly wanting, or I do want to own land in the future. Obviously, I might have a farm, but his knowledge, what I learned from him, is what I want to do. That's what I want to do. That's how I learned about soil. It's why I'm interested in soil. My dad's very into soil himself. We're livestock farmers. He's a livestock extension agent as well. So, we've been inundated in it. So I've been inundated in that whole aspect myself. I haven't had an aha moment yet with a farmer as far as soil health, but I have worked with 4-Hers. So the 4-Hers in Spotsylvania County, they have, the livestock club. So I've worked with stockman's contests and things of that nature. So on the quizzes, that's a part of that contest. I can put something about soil health in there so they can themselves learn, turn around, teach other people about soil health, why it's important, all that good stuff. to answer your question.
Yep. Leo, what inspires you, sir? And turn on your microphone if you would. There we go.
There you go. Thank you, Jeff. Interestingly enough, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot of inspiration from the next generation. We're farming in many ways 180 degrees from the way we did 20 years ago. Now, 20 years ago, we were essentially alfalfa-based production. We wanted to, like I said earlier, targeting production efficiency, optimum production every acre. And that meant that we were making hay all summer and feeding it all winter. And I needed, as I got older, to get away from that slavery. And so we started experimenting with some native grasses and some other native flora. And my son has taken an interest in that. As a matter of fact, he has a career now of establishing native grasses and wildflowers and so on for landowners and farmers throughout Virginia and neighboring states. And so we've dedicated a fair portion of the farm, of our farm, and as a matter of fact, most of our farm is rented land, and that has its challenges. But I'm fortunate to be able to for the most part, get along with my landlords, and it is. I think you could say inspirational to see what these native grasses and native wildflowers can do. They are, what I found years ago is that for the most part, most of us can do fine when we're not challenged by drought or inclement weather. But you don't have many of those years where everything pans out just the way you want. And what breaks you are the droughts, are the excessively wet areas and so on. And so you have to have some insurance to get through that. And for me, perennial cover, managing the grasses appropriately, and more I find the native grasses give us that insurance, particularly in summer droughts, which we have with some frequency in the Shenandoah Valley. They have, it's been really inspiring to see what these native grasses can do in terms of course, their production and how the livestock interact with them. And that's been a challenge. It's been a learning curve and figuring out how to use these native grasses. But what it does for wildlife habitat and pollinators and so on. I find a lot of satisfaction in what the future holds.
Very well said. Thank you, sir. Heather, is there a book, a podcast, a person? What inspires Heather Corner?
It's a great question. And I was thinking about that. And I think I draw most of my inspiration from watching the soil and the plants themselves respond to what we're doing and what is going on around us. My background is in plant ecology, and I studied the effects of climate change, in particular changing temperatures on plant physiology. And so I think because of that, I'm really interested in what is happening in the natural systems around our farm. We're lucky that we have a lot of even though it's only a 5-acre farm, we have a good portion in riparian areas, and it's great to see what is going on there and compare it to what's going on in the agricultural, the vegetable fields that are right next door, in terms of how easy it is for me to get my hand into the soil and how you know, how does the soil smell compared to our fields and things like that. And, you know, we've really seen a huge response in both the soil quality and the vegetables that we're able to produce on our tiny little farm, you know, because of the practices that we're trying to do. And I find that to be so motivating. And you can see that the plants are happy. You can see that the soil is happy. And, you know, for me, that's really where it's at.
If you've got happy soil, you got it all, don't you? And Tom and your associates there with Jubilee Climate Farm, just a couple of minutes remaining here, but what inspires your operation and you?
¿Cuál es la inspiración? Maricruz?
Trabajar la tierra, plantar. Tocar la tierra.
She's saying that she loves, just what inspires her is being connected to the soil and touching the soil and just working with it. It somehow brings her lots of, she was explaining this earlier, it just brings her a lot of energy and life just to be working with the soil. It feels like it heals her and gives her sanity. And to me personally, being with Maricruz and Irma and others who come from a long tradition of farming, indigenous practices, just to see their spiritual connection in many ways to agriculture and to what the soil means in their own lives and culture and healing is, to me, I find that really inspiring and energizing. As I think others said, I think Leo in particular, the youth that we have many, many students coming in, seeing them so excited about farming now. It just really gets me excited too. And especially farming that is in these practices that you're all mentioning, more regenerative and more natural based.
Carolyn, anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, they say it pretty well, and I feel like everyone said some wonderful things. I think for me, it's also just seeing like soil and healthy soil and this like positive connection between humanity and the soil is like what keeps me going. I see so much of like that as our starting point for like building healthy communities and building positive relationships, even outside of just soil health. It's like, that's our baseline to just having everyone feel secure. And it's such a beautiful place to like just be able to work with folks and have folks come to the farm and see the like community that's built out of that. And that really keeps me going. And I feel like I'm a constant learner in this. I'm still very new to all of it. So there's just like a constant excitement, and I can't wait to keep going in that. So that keeps me going, and talking with people like this tonight does as well.
I think all farmers are constant learners. That's a phrase I'll latch on to. Constant learners, very important. Well, thank you so much, each of you, for participating in this webinar. It has been really, this is a special event leading up to a special event this coming Sunday, which is World Soil Day. December the 5th is World Soil Day. And we are doing this as part of a recognition of that effort. And also today we had a brand new podcast that was published with Ira Wallace of Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. I love Ira, and I think you'll love our conversation with Ira. She has so much to share about growing vegetables, crops, about soil health, and she's an inspiration to me. I think you'll enjoy listening to that. It's called For the Soil, a Conversation. It's available on Apple Podcast, on YouTube, on various podcasts, and of course at the website of forthesoil.org. And if you just go up to the little menu bar there at the top, you'll see where it says podcast, and you can tune in to all of our podcasts. But thank you once again to all of our panelists, Robert, Kayleigh, Carolyn, Heather, Leo, Tom, and your crew there. Keep doing the good things that you're doing, and thank you again for joining us. That concludes this webinar. Good night, everybody.